human beings don't want to stand up when it impacts negatively upon their welfare. Amar Kathrada was an iconic figure in the freedom struggle. So there were many Muslims who were in the forefront of the anti-apartheid struggle, and they fought for what they looked upon and they seen was the Islamic aspect of fighting against injustice. South Africa should take the lead against apartheid Israel.
What accounts for that absence of justice as our core message?
Don't ask Allah Ta'ala for guidance if you're not prepared to move your feet.
Seeking justice and struggle is at the core of the Islamic message. Yet it seems today that many who profess the faith have become comatose, unready and unwilling to act in a way that may harm their interests. The genocide of Gaza has in many ways shown the best and the worst of our response. A great number have been energized, but many are still content with charity and dua, essential but insufficient for those that have the capacity. So how do we reorient our worldview and thinking? Today I have Moulana Ebrahim Bham, who is the Secretary General of the Council of Scholars of South Africa, Jamiat al-Ulama. He's also the long-standing Imam of some 40 years of the most historic mosque in Johannesburg, Masjid Hamidia. He is an educator, an advocate, and an activist, and champions local and international causes. And traditionally, he studied Islam to an MA level in Pakistan. Moulana, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to the Thinking Muslim.
Wa alaikum salam and assalamu alaikum to all your listeners.
Well, it's wonderful to have you with us. And actually, I think this is the shortest period I've spent in meeting someone and bringing them onto the podcast. I met you yesterday, barely 24 hours ago. And alhamdulillah, I was so impressed with our conversation that I invited you on. So Jazakallah, thank you for making time for us today.
Jazakallah is also my honor. I've always heard about the Thinking Muslim, so it is a great privilege to be with you.
Barakallah fiqh. Actually, I want to start with, I mentioned in the introduction that you are the Imam of some 40 years of one of the most historic mosques in Johannesburg, the Hamidia Masjid. I mean, explain the historical importance of that masjid.
So it's a very interesting, very interesting history. So I would say that the masjid was established towards the end of the 1800s. And at that time, the trustees of the masjid had communicated with the Sultan, the Ottoman. Now, obviously, the Ottoman Empire by that time was in a declining state. But they had communicated, which is on record. So they had written a special thanks to the Ottoman Empire and the Ottoman Sultan for sending Ramzi Bey. Ramzi Bey was the consul general of the Ottoman Empire sent to South Africa. He passed away in South Africa and he's buried in Johannesburg. But he spent much of his time in Cape Town. But so the trustees of this masjid wrote to the Sultan at that time to thank him for sending the emissary. And that letter was quite well prepared. It was formed, quite well done calligraphically, in a calligraphy way. And it still adorns the building of the Turkish embassy. So they've kept it. So it seemed that the name Hamidia was named after Sultan Abdul Hamid. Now, we know despite the fact that the Ottoman Empire was in decline, and sometimes it's very interesting that all empires in civilization towards the end and towards the decline, you always have people of great integrity. So the same thing happened with the Mughal Empire. So the Mughal Empire had a series of weak rulers towards the end of its time, the civilization. And then you had Bahadur Shah Zafar, who was one of the great men of letters, a great poet. Yeah. Bahadur Zafar आदमी उसको ना जानेगा ख्वाह हो कितना है साहिब फ़हम व ज़का जिसे ऐश में याद खुदा न रही और जिसे टेश में खौफ खुदा न रहा. What a beautiful thing. Don't regard Zafar as a human being if he cannot fear Allah Ta'ala, जिसे ऐश में खुदा, who does not fear Allah Ta'ala in his time of ease. Right? And at the time of his anger, he neglects Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he's not worthy of being called a human being if he has these two traits. So that was like, it almost like seems like towards the end of a era and an empire, it was like a candle that blows, the last flicker is almost as bright as at the time of its glory. So the same thing happened with the Ottoman Empire. Sultan Abdul Hamid, got the respect of the Muslims worldwide at that time because he opposed European colonialism, although maybe perhaps it was already too late because the decline had already set in. So it seemed that the trustees of the mosque had kept the name of the masjid under him because of the respect that he had garnered throughout the Muslim world. And that is one aspect with regard to the masjid. And in 1908, the famous incident that took place outside the Hamidia Masjid, of which pictures still exist, of the burning of the passes outside the masjid. Now, the burning of the passes was very significant because the pass was one of the cornerstones of the apartheid regime, that they used to have people having their pass to identify themselves as a racial background. So you are a white person, you're a colored person, you're an Indian person, or you're a black person. So in 1908, the Muslims got together and they made a form of protest. So Gandhi became famous with regard to the burning of the passes, although he was called from London, from the UK, to be a legal advisor for the burning of the passes. Then, of course, he was part and parcel of it. But however, it was the entire community initiative. And the burning of the passes took place. So even today, the city of Johannesburg has got a small memorial outside the masjid to commemorate the burning of the passes. And in 2008, there was a commemoration of the 100th century of the burning of the passes. At that time, Paulo Jordan. Now, Paulo Jordan was a minister in the first government after apartheid by Nelson Mandela. And he was regarded to be the intellectual voice of the ANC, the African National Congress. So he made mention, he said, as far as I can recall, and my history background and knowledge tells me that the first sign of resistance against apartheid, although apartheid was formally only introduced in 1947, 48. But he said, although from that time already there was, rumblings of starting the apartheid, and of course there was great amount of injustice by the colonialists at that time. So he said the first resistance was the burning of the passes. So the mosque was, the burning of the passes took place in 1908, which was commemorated in 2008.
Sheikh, I've been to South Africa. I had relatives in South Africa. And of course, most Muslims are probably, or many Muslims are from an Indian background. It just seems to me that South African Muslims are cut a bit differently to maybe other Indian Muslims around the world. I don't want to be too derogatory here, but it just seems to me that South African Muslims are very radical in a good way, and they're able to see justice and injustice quite clearly. Like, where does that come from?
I think it won't be a completely universal definition with regard to the Muslims and Indian Muslims. There have been both negative and positive, and there have been different approaches that have been taken by Indian Muslims with regard to apartheid. So let's say from the time of apartheid, 1947, 48 onwards, there have been people who oppose the apartheid state.
Yes.
And there were people who, I won't say necessarily, some of them might have been in conjunction or cooperating with the apartheid regime.
Yeah.
And maybe to say, I would say perhaps that many people, because of various reasons, and one of the reasons is human frailty, human weakness. Human beings don't want to stand up when it impacts negatively upon their welfare. So I would say a majority of the Muslims that time, the Gujarati Muslims and the Indian Muslims, were passive bystanders. Although there were a significant amount of people who had taken a stance. And the Indian National Congress became, and I suppose maybe it was also found by the Indian Congress, of course, Indian Congress before its decline, had a very progressive stance. It had a very progressive stance with regard to fighting against the British, and also a very progressive stance with regard to apartheid South Africa and with regard to Palestine. Therefore, it is quite sad with regard to the stance that India has taken from then onwards, because traditionally, India was amongst those who was the first to bring to the United Nations and to the Non-Aligned Conference the issue of apartheid South Africa. The first people to raise the flag with regard to and warning the world with regard to apartheid was India. And for now to see that the right-wing party in India have become pro-Israel is going against the very tradition of the founders of India. So maybe Indian National Congress in South Africa was fashioned from the Congress in India. So you had different strands with regard to the Muslim community or the Indian community. There were those who were very vocal against apartheid, and of course there's a proud record. So the first person who brought up the aspect with regard to apartheid South Africa was an alim, Ufari, and who completed his studies in Darul Uloom Deoband, was Maulvi Kachalia. And Maulvi Kachalia happens to be a distant relative. My maternal aunt is married to his only son, who was passed away recently, several months back. So the two people were sent by the African National Congress, Moses Kotane and Maulvi Kachalia, who first raised the issue of apartheid in South Africa in the Bandung Conference in Indonesia in the founding of the Non-Aligned Conference. And that's where from there onwards it took center stage in the United Nations. And there's no doubt whatsoever that it was because of the international boycotts and the international concern and pressure upon South Africa that saw the fall of the apartheid South Africa. So Muslims were in the forefront with regard to it.
And my understanding is even on Robben Island, there were Muslims who were imprisoned with Nelson Mandela. Can you enlighten us on those Muslims?
Well, there were very many Muslims who were there. Who were one was Ahmad Kathrada.
Yeah. Ahmad
Kathrada was an iconic figure in the freedom struggle. Yeah. He was with Nelson Mandela. And, after when Nelson Mandela became the first president, he appointed him to be a minister in 2 portfolios, which he declined. And he said that I didn't enter politics to become a minister or to take the trappings. And he remained a vocal, a critic against injustice. So even when ANC took a path that towards, in the time of Zuma, etc., which many people of the founders of ANC and the people who were there in the struggle found it very much against the essence of the founders of ANC, he was very, very vocal against it. In fact, he wrote a open letter, which was published in the media. So Ahmad Kathrada was the one who was with Nelson Mandela in Robben Island. And of course, there was Imam Abdullah Haroon, who was also killed by the apartheid forces. There were teachers who were in the forefront. Ahmed Timol was thrown down from the infamous John Foster Square, which still remains in Johannesburg. And he was thrown down from the building from the 10th floor. So there were many Muslims who were in the forefront. Babla Saruji, who was also there. People like Abdullah Jassad, who came and settled down in London. And he headed the anti-apartheid movement from London. Abdullah Jassad also happens to be a family member, coming from the very same ancestral village of mine. And right towards the end, he was like someone who suffered the consequences of the torture that was there, Dr. Yusuf Jassad. So all of them, Rashid Saluji. So there were many Muslims who were in the forefront of the anti-apartheid struggle, and they fought for what they looked upon and they seen was the Islamic aspect of fighting against injustice. I remember when Radio Islam was established by the Jamaat Ulama. And I had the opportunity of interviewing Ahmad Kathrada and asked him, what was the basis of your entering and resisting the apartheid regime? And he said that it was the social, economic, and the social justice teachings of Islam that made me oppose the apartheid regime.
So fast forward to today, South Africa has been at the center of this international legal struggle against the apartheid state of Israel. And it's Dr. Nalendi Pandor, who I know you have a relationship with. And yesterday there was a great conversation between the two of you and our audience. Tell me a little bit about Dr. Pandor and her work as Foreign Secretary and how she brought this case to the ICJ, but also how the Muslim community maybe responded and helped in that conversation.
So what transpired that Naledi was first a Minister of Education in the previous dispensation.
Yes.
And then she was made the Minister of Foreign Affairs, or the way the world would call it, although in South Africa it's known as DIRCO, the Department of International Relations.
Right.
So she was made the minister, and she was always very articulate and very, very, strong in her opposition against injustice. So when, obviously we know that many activists have always warned against making the entire scenario, what is happening in Gaza, not to relate it specifically only to October the 7th. Gaza has a history of oppression and injustice way before October the 7th. And there have been many activists who have spoken about this aspect. And there has been an attempt by the Zionist regime to make everything, filter or come around 7th of October. And whatever the circumstances, and much has been written with regard to the entire, what actually happened and what transpired. And of course, there is a dubious role that was played with regard to October 7th. I'm not going to go into that. But after the October the 7th, the Jewish lobby in South Africa met with the president, right? Met with the president, and apparently the media gave the understanding that the president said certain things with regard to the October 7th thing, which obviously there are many people who have spoken about the incident and, condemned the incident or apparently what had happened. But of course, a lot of people have started to saying that, listen, there's much more and much beyond 7th of October. So the ANC were not happy with regard to the media portrayal of what happened with the South African Jewish Board of Deputies. And the ANC called up a special meeting with pro-Palestinian activists with regard to the matter. And there was a group of over 40 people who went to the headquarters of the African National Congress in Luthuli House in the center of Johannesburg. And I was also part and parcel of it. Myself and 3 other people were given the task of, leading the presentations. And that's the first time that we spoke to the president, saying that South Africa, given its historical role and given the fact that it has been vocal and has fought against apartheid, and the world supported it, South Africa should take the lead against apartheid Israel. And there is no doubt whatsoever there is sufficient evidence with regard to the fact that Israel is an apartheid state. And this is something that has been recognized even by the United Nations General Assembly. And a lot of people have written with regard to it. And I think it's a moral responsibility for South Africa to speak out against apartheid Israel. And at that stage, I remember that the people in the delegation spoke about the fact that maybe we should take the case to the ICC. And there was a response from the ANC that I don't think all the parties are signatories to the ICC. And ICC, I might be wrong with regard to the technicalities and the definitions, only prosecutes individuals and does not prosecute states. And we are looking at other options. So maybe that was one of the times when this was mooted. And to the credit of South Africa, that they did take that bold step, even at the expense of criticism and threats from the Western world, in particular America. And Nalendi Pandor, being the Minister of DIRCO, meaning the Minister of Foreign Affairs, was in the forefront with regard to those threats and was in the forefront of articulating the South African response and the South African delegation and the prosecution of the genocide case against Israel.
Shaykh Ebrahim, I think I'm not exaggerating when I say that Nalendi Pandor is probably the strongest Muslim leader we have in the world at the moment. The Muslim world is silent, and we have Muslim countries that have far greater resources probably than South Africa, who are not actually silent. They're colluding with the enemy. Like, what accounts for this disparity where you've got this brave foreign minister from South Africa who speaks the haqq, who speaks the truth, and yesterday when I was amazed at just how strident and strong she was, in comparison to these very weak leaders.
I recall something in yesterday's program when she was asked, how does she counter the threats and how do the family counter? And she said, well, firstly, there were two things that she made mention. One was my Islamic stance.
Yes.
And my religious background and how I looked upon and she quoted with regard to the Quran. And I also, in yesterday's talk, spoke about the aspect of the justice in Islam. Yeah. And I think if every Muslim want to follow the Quranic teachings with regard to justice, there will be no doubt whatsoever that they will be duty bound and they will be obliged to fight against injustice. When Allah Ta'ala in the Holy Quran says, لَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا رُسُلُنَا بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ, we have sent all the prophets with clear proof. وَأَنزَلْنَا مَعَهُمُ الْكِتَابِ, and we send down with them revelation and the books of Almighty Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. لِيَقُومَ النَّاسُ بِالْقِسْطِ, to establish people upon justice. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَعْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ وَإِيتَاءِ ذِي الْقُرْبَى. Allah Ta'ala commands you with regard to justice and virtuousness, virtue and righteousness. Inna Allah ya'muru bil adli wal ihsani wa ita'i dhil qurba, and fulfilling the rights of the relatives. Wa yanha 'anil fahsha'i, and Allah Ta'ala prohibits for you immorality and all forms of injustice and all forms of evil. And that's such a powerful verse of the Holy Quran. And as I said yesterday, that normally throughout the world I've seen this, whether it be in South Africa, Sri Lanka, Australia, UK, people conclude the Jummah khutbah with this ayat. Yeah. And it was first introduced, in fact, in the beginning stages of Islam by the righteous Khalif Umar bin Abdul Aziz rahmatullahi alayhi, who ended the Jummah khutbah with this ayat. And it is said that one of the great Arab tribes, the leader of the Arab tribe, Aqsam bin Sayfi, when he heard about the coming of Islam and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he sent two of his most trusted representatives and can go and find out who is this Muhammad, who is the new religion, and find out what is his teachings. And they came to Nabi Karim sallallahu alaihi wasallam and they asked, who are you? He said, Muhammad ibn Abdullah, I'm the servant of Almighty Allah. I'm the messenger of the Almighty Allah. What is your teachings? And Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam recited this verse. And that is the essence of the entire Islam, And when they came back and he just read the ayat and he said, Subhanallah, is that what is his teaching? And there's one ayat which you and I listen to on a weekly basis and doesn't move and inspire us, became the means of that entire tribe accepting Islam. And Sister Nalendi yesterday made mention that it is because of this Islamic teachings with regard to justice that had given her the courage to be able to pursue what she had pursued.
That's amazing. So let's talk about justice in Islam. You said it's at the core of the Islamic message. But today, often when we think about Muslims and our response to these crises like Gaza, we can often conclude that Muslims are quite comatose, they're quite quiet. They're not willing to work against their interests. And why is that? Even there's a governmental level where there's an absolute abject failure, but also at a local level, there seems to be a failure sometimes at least. Alhamdulillah, things are getting better. What accounts for that absence of justice as our core message?
It's hard to explain, really. It's hard to also fathom that when there's such great emphasis with regard to it. And sometimes the Quran says, fight for justice, even if it's against your own self, even if it's against your own family members and against your own interests. Yeah. So, I can't pinpoint what is the reason. It may be the weakness of faith, but at the end of the day, there's also some positive, interactions, and there's some positive work that has been done by people. Yeah. And, well, the point with regard to Gaza, why it's even more sad is that this is happening like almost played out in front of the world. It's played out in the screens of people. People are seeing it, and many a times the more you see with regard to what is happening, it almost leads to a feeling of not regarding the seriousness of it. It's almost like you lose the seriousness because it has been played out. It's almost like you've seen so many films in which things has happened, and you can't make the differentiation between what is like portrayed in a film and what is actually in real time. This is not something that is, is a film. This is, this is something that is real time. You are seeing people who have been slaughtered in real time. You are seeing women and children, and it's absolutely amazing that not only Muslims, people who claim to be humanitarians or people who claim to be people who will uphold human rights will be silent with regard to what is happening. it becomes belief. But this is the reality with regard to what is happening. And we really need to be doing more. Obviously, no one is saying that you should do something that is reckless.
Yes.
And I think Nalendi also made mention of that point, that don't do something that could impact upon the space that you are in. But within that space, whatever you can. You don't have to be reckless, but within the space, you need to be doing whatever you can. وَأَعِدُّ لَهُم مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. The Quran says, prepare yourself and do something against to the best of your ability. There's a very interesting story in our Islamic history of Imam Muzani rahmatullahi alayh. Imam Muzani was imprisoned. So every Friday, he used to prepare himself for the Jummah prayers. Wear his best clothes according to the circumstances that he was in prison. Maybe that time people were tied in chains, and he used to walk to the door of the prison. Right, and then the prison authorities would tell him, you were not allowed to get out of the prison. And he used to lift up his hand and he say, Ya Allah, إِذَا نُودِيَ لِلصَّلَاةِ مِنْ يَوْمِ الْجُمُعَةِ فَاسْهَوْا إِلَى ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. You have told us in the Quran that when the call is made for Jummah prayers, then hasten towards the zikr of Almighty Allah. I have done whatever is within my ability. I have come to the doors of the prison. They are not allowing me to go further. But according to your command, I have done whatever I can. Forgive me for not going beyond that. Now, I think that should be some sort of inspiration. How much can you go up till? Are you satisfied that you have done everything within your own ability to be able to do something with regard to it? There's something that can be done. I'll give you an example, which is quite an amazing example. When Ismail Adam Patel came to South Africa recently for one conference, and he wanted to meet with the Islamic Medical Association. So we set up a meeting. It was at the Johannesburg Muslim School boardroom, and he came and he said that there is the Islamic Medical Associations in Britain, BIMA I think is called,
Yes.
And Islamic Medical Association in Karachi, in Pakistan, in Malaysia, are doing some sort of, to help the people in Gaza. So they wanted to call some students, they wanted to call some of the children who could make their way through Egypt, who have had serious disabilities and serious physical challenges, if they could be accommodated in the various countries. They were looking at doctors who could provide some form of virtual learning to the people who are in Gaza to be able to continue their medical studies. And quite a few things were put in, discussed. So the Islamic Medical Association said they will be part and parcel of it. So Imtiaz Suleiman of the Waqf al-Waqifin, a very famous international relief organization, which has earned great amount of admiration, not only amongst Muslims, but even non-Muslims. So he called some 20 students who have been accommodated in Cape Town University, and a small group of students who have come to the University of Witwatersrand from Gaza. And then there were certain, some of them who were called in and who had several physical challenges and disabilities. And one of the doctors just told me recently that they were all surprised that in one of the patients who came, young person, when they opened them up, they found that the gas that is being used by the Zionist forces was still busy burning the body from the inside. And they didn't know how to deal with it. They never had any experience with regard to something like this. And they said that we need to take it from that clinic that they had, the medical clinic. They might have to transfer it to a clinic that had the facilities and the resources to deal with it. And the thought came that, people talk about the lack of genocide. I mean, what is that? Small children being, impacted with bombs of that nature, that even after several months, they still, the impact with regard to that is happening on their bodies. This is the extent of the oppression and injustice, And surely we have to be able to do something with regard to it. At least, maybe it might not stop it, but at least here was an attempt by the doctors of the world to be able to sit and say, all right, this is what we're going to do. This is within our capacity. And they're doing whatever we can. Now, people who are journalists, people who are ulama can work within their own spheres of influence to make a difference.
How do we remain motivated in this long struggle? I mean, the Gaza genocide has now been over a year. And after a while, you try and you try and you try, but even protests sometimes seem to fall on deaf ears. In the face of an inability to change the reality in front of us, how do we remain motivated in this struggle?
I think one important point is that we remain motivated because we as Muslims don't look upon the world as the be-all and the end-all of our existence. That we know that there is another sphere of existence which is more evolved and more just than the existence we have here. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Holy Quran has made mention several places that Allah ta'ala is not. So in Surah Ibrahim there's a very beautiful verse. وَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّ اللَّهَ غَافِلًا عَمَّا يَعْمَلُ الظَّالِمُونَ. Don't think that Allah ta'ala is unaware of what the oppressors do. Allah ta'ala is aware of it. And then in another place in the Holy Quran in Surah Maryam in the last page, إِنَّمَا نَعُدُّ لَهُ فَلَا تَعْجَلْ عَلَيْهِمْ. Don't be hasty with regard to the people who are oppressors. إِنَّمَا نَعُدُّ لَهُمْ حَدًّا. Hope I can be able to explain it in English the way the Arabic conveys it. We are counting the wrongs that they are doing. Don't be hasty. We are counting what they are doing. And we firmly believe. And I've got absolutely no doubt whatsoever, even to the degree of 1 iota, that all those who are doing the injustice, they will have to face the consequences. But we are human beings. We sometimes like to see some things like, in haste. We would like to see some things quick. It's natural. And sometimes we feel, Ya Allah, the way the people who are committing injustice and oppression, and then let us also live to see the day when they have to face the consequences of what they are doing. We are only seeing them committing the oppression and injustice. When will we be able to see them also facing the punishment of what they are doing? I mean, and it's human beings have been very mean. I mean, see what happened in Srebrenica, what is happening in Sudan, and what is happening. When are we going to see the people who are committing this injustice and oppression have to face? Now, we have to keep in mind that many a time things don't happen according to our time frame. We have a time frame. Sometimes we have a time frame that this one oppressor must be killed after Fajr, must be destroyed after Fajr. This oppressor must be, obliterated after Zohar, and the third one must be completely eradicated after Asr. It doesn't happen by our time frames. It happens by the time frames of Allah. Allah Ta'ala says, Inna Rabbaka Sari'ul Hisab. He is very swift in taking reckoning. But the time frames, in terms of the entirety of time, compared to our our time frame is very limited to the eternal justice of Allah Ta'ala. Now let me give you an example from the Holy Quran. Okay. So when Fir'aun was at his peak, right, and we also يُقَتِّلُونَ أَبْنَاءَكُمْ وَيَسْتَحْيُونَ نِسَاءَكُمْ. He used to kill the children of Bani Israel and he used to imprison the woman, right? So Musa alayhi salatu wasalam made an amazing dua. رَبَّنَا تْمِسْ عَلَى أَمْوَالِهِمْ وَاشْتُدْ عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ رَبَّنَا تْمِسْ عَلَى أَمْوَالِهِمْ. Oh Allah, destroy his wealth, because that wealth is being used to oppress people. وَاشْتُدْ عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ. Put a veil on his heart, that he must not be able to see the truth. He must not bring iman حَتَّى يَرَهُ الْعَذَابَ الْعَلِيمِ, until he sees your punishment. Now this is a dua of a prophet, one of the great prophets, Kalimullah, the one who conversed with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now you and I, we make dua after one day, we feel Allah Ta'ala is not accepting our dua. Musa alayhi salam made this dua, that oh Allah, this man who is oppressing people, and what degree of oppression that he is doing, don't let him die until he sees your punishment. And it happened, right? So Allah Ta'ala says, Hatta idha adrakahu al-gharq. When Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, because of his dua, Fir'aun was now drowning. قَالَ أَمَنْتُ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا الَّذِي آمَنَتْ بِهِ بَنُو إِسْرَائِيلِ. I bring iman upon the Lord of Bani Israel, right? And I want to become a Muslim. And Allah Ta'ala says, Al-an, now after all the oppression that you have done, وَكُنْتَ مِنَ الْمُفْسِدِينَ, and you are amongst those who had, bring corruption and oppression and injustice upon the earth. Not only will we destroy you, فَالْيَوْمَ نُنَجِّيكَ بِبَنَلِكَ لِتَكُونَ لِمَنْ خَلْفَكَ آيَةً. We will preserve your body for people to say this is what happened to the oppressors. This is what happened to people who commit injustice. When I went to Egypt a few years back, and we went to the Egypt Museum, and we said that that particular place where they don't allow you even to take photos and images because they say it can impact upon the preservation. So they've said Ramses III is the Fir'aun that is made mention in the Holy Quran. So when someone asked me, I was part of a group, and they asked me, is this possible? I said, well, it's possible. Allah Ta'ala says that we will preserve his body to show you what Allah has done to the people who have committed oppression. The point I would like to make was that when Musa alayhi salam made this dua, so there's two narrations. One narration says it happened after 40 years. And the other narration said it happened after 70 years. Okay. So we must never become... So Allah Ta'ala also tells us, فَلَا تَعْجَلْ عَلَيْهِمْ. Don't be hasty. Allah will catch them. It will happen. But it won't happen by our time frame. I've got firm belief that it will happen. How it will happen, only Allah knows.
And that's a fantastic, really great explanation. So let me ask you then a question, which I've been thinking about a lot. Accountability. We know that from a Muslim perspective, all of our lives are accounted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's nothing that is that we do which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not recognize as either being good or bad. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us compensation for that, for our actions and our deeds. So in relation then to Gaza, how do we know that we have absolved ourselves of our responsibility, if we can ever find that? How do we know that we have done enough from an accountability, not from a results perspective, from a perspective of Allah Ta'ala? How would you answer that?
I would say that you have to question yourself that hasibu anfusakum qabla an tuhasabu. Evaluate your deeds before Almighty Allah Ta'ala evaluate your deeds. You have to ask yourself the question, have we done enough? Yeah. And really, I think most of the time we will come back with the answer that we have not. Yeah. Not to the extent of the scale of what is happening. We have not. And may Allah Ta'ala forgive us for our shortcomings. We know that Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, Al-mu'minuna karajuli wahid. The believers are like one single body. Do we feel the pain? I mean, what would we have done if something like this happens, to ourselves? What would we have done? Yeah. And here is something, when we are one body, I mean, have we done sufficiently? And here we're not saying that someone must just go out in the streets and do something that is reckless against the law. No, it's not. But everyone must say that within my own circumstances, have I done sufficiently? As a reporter, as an alim, I think even with regard to reading 2 rakats of salat on a daily basis, have we done that? Really, it's something that we have to think that, Ya Allah, we are asking you to resolve this situation. We cannot do anything. Ya Allah, you bring about the situation. So I think that is something that we really need to have a greater accountability. And that is, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu used to say, فَمَن يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ خَيْرًا يَرَهُ وَمَن يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ شَرًّا يَرَهُ. It's a very famous verse in the Holy Quran, which our Imams reads in the different salats. He said it is one of the most, the verse in the Holy Quran that induces the greatest fear with regard to accountability. Even if you do an iota of evil, you will see it in front of Allah Ta'ala on the day of Qiyamah. And even if you do an iota of good, you will see it in front of Almighty Allah on the day of judgment. So, I mean, we have to keep that. And it's not only with regard to our ibadat. Yeah. There's a very beautiful incident of Umar radiallahu anhu about justice and accountability with regard to oppression and injustice. So he came to a Christian person in Egypt. They were having a camel race, and the son of the governor, Amr ibn al-As, because he was a son of the governor, lost the camel race to a person of another faith when the Muslims were in authority in Egypt, and he hit him across his bare back with a whip. And he felt very bad, but he couldn't do anything because the son of the governor. So he heard that Umar radiallahu anhu was a person who was very just, and he came to Medina and he told Umar the whole thing. And Umar radiallahu anhu summoned the son of the governor and summoned Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu. And when he summoned him, he ascertained the facts. He realized that he did what the plaintiff had made mention of. So he told him that you also whip him the way he whipped you. So when he was about to whip, he said, how did he whip you? He said, no, I didn't have my clothes. So he told the son of the governor, take out your clothes. Let him whip you the way you whipped him. And then when he finished whipped him, he said, whip the governor. He said, the governor didn't do anything to him. Didn't do anything to me. Why should I whip him? So Umar, symbolically hit the governor and said, it's because of being the son of the son of the governor. It is because of your position that he took the courage to do. And he said a very amazing statement, He said, since when have you enslaved people? وَقَدْ وَلَدَتْهُ أُمُّهُ أَحْرَارًا. When their mothers gave birth to them as free people. Now this aspect of enslaving people, oppressing people, treating people unjustly, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, given per people the dignity, to be free. Since when have you enslaved people when Allah ta'ala had created them as free people? It's such a powerful statement that what Muslims are supposed to stand for, to stand up against injustice, oppression, and modern day slavery. I was just seeing a documentary while I was coming here that they talked about Al Jazeera, modern day slavery in the UK, right? About how some people are brought in under the pretext of finding jobs, and then they are kept away. Their passports are taken away. They are given £40 a week, and what pitiable conditions they are kept in. I mean, so we as human beings have to take a stance, and Muslims have to be in the forefront because of our religious teachings to be against all form of oppression and injustice.
I have a lot of non-Muslims who watch my show, quite a good number actually, and they like it when Muslims are talking about issues of justice, and they find a connection with Muslims, especially over Gaza. But some of them do comment on my videos. Why is it that your speakers speak very eloquently about justice issues, but sometimes we see injustice in the Muslim world, and we find that in Muslim majority countries, often poor people are treated very badly, and there's corruption, and there's how would you respond to that very valid query, I think, from a non-Muslim?
I think the one question is you can't judge a religion by its adherents. You have to judge a religion by its teachings and its values.
Yeah.
It is said that if people and Muslims don't uphold the teachings, I mean, we are obliged to do so. I mean, that is what our teachings, and we all, at least emotionally, we show great amount of attachment to the religion. Yeah. But if we are going to be serious with regard to the religion, then we have to put it into practice. As I made mention of a quote yesterday, that don't ask Allah Ta'ala for guidance if you're not prepared to move your feet. And I think it's important that if we are going to be serious with regard to Islam, we have to put Islam into practice in all facets. Islam is not a religion only about devotion. Yeah. It's a complete, which gives, teachings with regard to politics, with regard to financial matters, financial dealings, monetary dealings, with regard to oppression and injustice. One of the things that happens is if you are not going to fill the vacuum, and I mean, it's very correctly said that if righteous people do not fill the vacuum with regard to government and governing issues, then who are you going to blame when corrupt people take over that reign? And we do understand that the system of the world is such that it has made it easier for people of corruption to take over the reins of justice compared to the people of justice. But we have to try. At the end of the day, Almighty Allah is not going to question us with regard to our success or failure. Allah is going to question us with regard to our efforts. This is a very important point.
Right.
So there are messengers of the Almighty who will come on the day of Qiyamah. Some will come with no followers. Some will come with one followers. Hazrat Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam, made da'wah and called people to righteousness and goodness for 950 years, and there were 80 people who accepted him. But he's still successful, So so the Almighty doesn't look upon results. It looks upon how much of effort you did. And his efforts, as Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam's efforts, were complete and perfect. Inni da'awtu qawmi layla wa nahara. Oh Allah, I call my people day and night. Every time I call them towards righteousness, they put their fingers on their ears not to listen to me. Then sometimes I call them publicly in front of everyone. Sometimes I went to their homes and I spoke to them secretly. And still. So there was no dearth, when there was no lack of effort in his path. Now whether Allah Ta'ala granted them hidayat or not, that was in the hands of Almighty Allah. But from our perspective, how much of effort did you do with regard to implementing? That is something that Allah will question us.
One last question for you. Often, especially when we're in a minority, you're in a minority in South Africa, we're certainly a minority here in Britain, there is a dilemma in our minds about, let's call it ummatic consciousness, thinking about our ummah versus thinking about our local concerns. And often there are two camps. One camp would say, well, we have to cater for the local issues that the Muslim community faces. But of course, the ummah concerns are massive. And there's Gaza has shown us that Gaza is the tip of the iceberg. SubhanAllah, a massive tip of the iceberg, but still we have many endemic issues within the Muslim Ummah. How do we balance this ummatic vision versus sort of a very local way of viewing our struggles and our commitments?
Personally, I don't think there should be a contradiction in the two. We do whatever. I mean, we all know there's a circle of concern and the circle of influence. So there's many things that we have a concern with regard to it. And sometimes you can't always reach out to every aspect of your concern. It may be sometimes beyond you as a human being. But within your own influence, what can you do to influence the situation? And of course, the greater your circle of influence, the greater it impacts upon your circle of concern. So I think whatever we can do within our own circle of influence, how much can we do? And then slowly that moves on. I mean, you look at the time of our beloved Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. While Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam moved on towards the ideal. And the ideal was, came to Medina Munawwara. Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam set up Medina Munawwara. And there's such a long history with regard to Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam moving to an ideal right till the end of our beloved Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's life. The entire Arabian Peninsula had become a bastion of justice, etc. But it wasn't always that way. So Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam went to Taif. Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, we all know the situation in Taif. I was recently in Taif. And this brought back great memories of our beloved Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's effort and his struggle in Taif. And Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did not succeed in setting up a base with regard to, didn't succeed, maybe not in, Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was always successful in every endeavor of his. But in terms of getting the people of Taif to accept, and then Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam comes back, and that time, in the time of Makkah, there was this whole situation that if anyone comes back, especially with the hostility against Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, that you take the protection of someone. So Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam saw the protection of some people, they didn't accept. And then eventually Mutim bin Adi accepted and said, I'll give you protection. And he did it in a very amazing way. He called Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he and his own sons and members of his tribe went into the Haram and to the Kaaba and Baytullah and said, I have given Muhammad protection. Right? And whoever harms him harms me and harms my tribe. And I will take it as a declaration of war. So the Prophet ﷺ dealt with this situation while moving towards the ideal. So we, within our own situation, whatever we can do, we shouldn't underestimate whatever we do. Work on your circle of influence, and the greater your circle of influence comes, it impacts upon your concerns, your circle of concern.
Shaykh Ebrahim Bham, it's really been a pleasure today, and it's been an enlightening conversation. Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much for your time.
Jazakumullah. Jazakallah reward you, and Jazakallah for the opportunity.
Please remember to subscribe to our social media and YouTube channels, and head over to our website thinkingmuslim.com to sign up to my weekly newsletter. Jazakallah khair.